Social 20-1 AP, the Dada Art movement is a this is a funny anti-art movement coming out of World War One. It's interesting. I always get a chuckle out of it. I thought we'd cover it since we're doing World War One in 20-1 anyway. Dada art was a revolt against the culture and values that this movement believed caused and supported the carnage that was World War One. So um, the Dada art movement would have been very critical of the romanticized vision of war, of the duty, of the honor, the fighting for your country, the blah, blah, blah that made war so attractive to young men. They would have snickered at that vision, that version of war. Um, and they believed that those attitudes and the values that went with them were the reason why that war was fought, and they're the reasons for all of the carnage that came out of World War One. Um, all of the millions of young men that died, the civilians that died, the billions of dollars spent fighting a war that really many people thought there was no physical reason for that war to be fought in the first place. So to critique their disdain for the people that guided their countries into that war, you got the Dada art movement. So they're trying to discredit the socio-economic status quo of the time. So they're attacking, they're critiquing the upper class that they believe made that war happen, that they believe caused that war to happen and sacrifice so many young men. So these were people that skipped out on conscription. They avoided the war altogether and sheltered in neutral cities. Zurich, Switzerland comes to mind, as you know. It's a neutral country. Barcelona, Spain. They skipped out on I guess fighting the war and began the Dada art movement. Many of them, as I said, moved to neutral countries. Sorry, I'm stretching and yawning. And they decided to show their protest, to demonstrate their protest and disdain for the war through art, poems, sculptures, and even literature and things like that. Um, it's considered non-art. So in many ways, they're going to critique the war itself, the leaders that led to that war happening, but they're going to critique culture in general. They're going to critique the Renaissance. They're going to critique the Enlightenment movement through their artwork, not just what happened during World War One. Features of Dada art, it's very irreverent. It's very insulting to the past, to heritage, to the ruling classes of that time. Don't forget that in Europe at this time, there were still what we would consider to be monarchies and empire. So during World War One, there was a German empire, there was a Russian empire. There was an Austro-Hungarian empire. There was an Ottoman empire. So they are, in many ways, lashing out at fascism, things that they think are wrong in society um, through their work. It's very sarcastic. And in many ways, it's very quirky, too. It's supposed to be. So here's the first example. Marcel Duchamp and his critique of the Mona Lisa. I'll let you read it for yourself. I don't want to read that aloud. So he's critiquing, he's challenging what people considered to be beautiful art at that time. He's critiquing the Renaissance, and he's critiquing the hyperbole that went with the Renaissance, and the ruling classes that it would have admired art from the Renaissance. He's just trying to be irreverent. He's just trying to be insulting to make his point. There's a mustache on the Mona Lisa if you didn't see. Here's a German piece of Dada art. He's critiquing German leadership that led them into a war that they inevitably are going to lose by 1918. The reason why we know it's German, well, I mean, it's Germanic language on the bottom, so obviously. But if you look close, the hyena is wearing the German cross, and the top hat is intended to signify probably Uh, Otto von Bismarck, who unified Germany in 1871, he's probably critiquing Bismarck and his policy of blood and iron, of Weltpolitik, and that sure, those policies made Germany strong. But look at the cost of that. Look at the young men lying face down dead because of the German Empire and its ambitions up to and during World War One. It's no coincidence that they pick a hyena. You can see the spots because hyenas in nature are considered cowardly, sneaky, and conniving animals. And that's what this form of Dada art is trying to portray. The top hat could be Bismarck. It could just be the upper German middle upper class that drew them into that conflict. And notice too, the hyena didn't have to pay the price for the war. Everyone else did, but not Germany's leadership, not the hyena. The Murdering Airplane, 1920. So this was a look back on the carnage of World War One. And what he's trying to show here is that shouldn't technology, innovation, and science, hence the airplane, be used to help people, to help people evolve, to help the human race evolve? Because all the airplane did in his eyes in World War One was kill people, was wound people, was maim people. Hence the murdering airplane and his commentary on how they were using technology at that time. A lot of money was spent on World War One, but did it really progress the human race, or did it just give us more effective ways of killing each other? Fountain, another one by Marcel Duchamp, 1917. Again, he's critiquing the Renaissance and the old Baroque art periods. The Renaissance, by many, is claimed to be the beginning of the Enlightenment movement. So, as we learned in class, the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, would eventually give us democracy. Would again, they'd give us freedom. They'd give us capitalism, upward mobility. They would break us from the bonds of feudalism and the old regime in Western Europe. That's what we typify the Renaissance and Enlightenment with. They helped us. They evolved human beings. He's critiquing the Renaissance by critiquing fountains and art from the Renaissance by supplanting them with, if you haven't figured this out yet, this is actually a urinal. So here's the pipe. You'd have to imagine that you're looking down at this urinal. And you know what people do with urinals, hence his critique of what we thought was evolved society at that time. He's blaming that kind of thinking for World War One. How could you get us into this mess? How could you let it come to this, etc. Karawani, this one's weird. I told you that this was going to be weird and quirky. Don't you dare laugh at me or it. Um, this demonstration of art or lack thereof, or whatever you would call that, is one more time critiquing the diplomatic decisions that led to World War One in the first place. I mean, how could they have let it come to that? We pay politicians, we elect them to avoid things like war, not take us down the path directly to war. So the lack of meaning, the lack of intelligence, of organization and order that you see in the costume is intended to, it's supposed to symbolize the lack of order and structure in European society that led to World War One in the first place and the horror and carnage that went with it. So I hope you liked our look at Dada art. It's just a fun one to cover. The odd time on the AP exam, you'll get Dada art as a question on the multiple choice portion of the test. Um, it's quirky, it's funny. That's all we were trying to do.